What are the three key fantasy football questions facing the 2022 Jacksonville Jaguars as training camp and preseason begins? It's time to break it down right here and right now as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Our Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. A lot of stuff coming for our fantasy football content, also breaking down all the key storylines in training camp, including the Steelers quarterback battle, what we can expect from Justin Fields. So a lot of good stuff there for you that you can check out at sportingnews.com. So excited for that here to start to rev up for the NFL season. That's what we were doing on Locked On Fantasy Football. We're getting to all 32 teams and breaking down the three key questions there that we want to have answered in fantasy football as we get through camp in the preseason. Now we're down to our second to last team in the AFC South. Only 6 teams left to break down. So if you missed a look at any of the previous 26 teams, those are on our feed, including the latest 2 from this division, the Texans and Colts. But today's team is the Jacksonville Jaguars. A lot of intrigue over what this team can do as they kind of blow up everything they had with Urban Meyer and Darrell Bevell and start fresh with Doug Peterson with their number 1 overall franchise quarterback from 2021, Trevor Lawrence. So intriguing team to break down. We'll do that in a moment. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We're free and available to you on all platforms. All right, the Jaguars. Yeah, they're a team that kind of forgetting about the rookie season of Lawrence, and Travis Etienne was wiped out by a knee injury even before it started. So fresh look here with Doug Peterson and different concepts taking over in Jacksonville. They pretty much have a plan, which they didn't have a lot of with Urban Meyer last year. So this is a start from scratch with this core of offensive players, and we want to look at them for sure. So we'll start at quarterback as we always do with our key questions. Does Trevor Lawrence have enough upside here to be a fantasy football sleeper in 2022? Well, let's look at his rookie season. It was not very good. He had that multiple touchdown game early. It took him a long time to get another one. Just was ugly. He never fit well in the offense. I don't think they had a real plan. The receiving core was all over the place, just couldn't get the consistency, and he led the league in a tie with Matthew Stafford for interceptions. But at least Matthew Stafford was putting up big touchdown numbers. Those were not coming up with Lawrence there last year. And you got to first look at the sources of production here for Lawrence. Where can he throw the ball? Well, I think they really took a big hit when they couldn't figure out tight end and Dan Arnold got hurt. Now you add some depth there with Evan Ingram. So you have Evan Ingram and Dan Arnold. They're splitting that role. You have Etienne, who he knows very well because they were in the Clemson backfield together. So Etienne's calling card was catching passes as an Alvin Kamara light there for the Tigers. So familiarity with this checkdown guy. And James Robinson was a good player in that regard when needed the last 2 years as an undrafted guy that has definitely exceeded expectations of his production. But Robinson coming off a major injury now, that slowed things down as well down the stretch last season where they can run, set things up. And the receiving core was highly disappointing here. And they moved on from DJ Chark and made that move and traded him away, or pretty much didn't want to sign him at all, and kind of swapped him out as the receiver I thought they were going to target and keep more as a potential number 1 for Trevor Lawrence, but they didn't go in that direction. Now they've demoted Laviska Shenault Jr. He had some promise just a couple of years ago, but the Urban Meyer system kind of ruined him. He's dropped down to number 4. You have Laquan Treadwell, who was the default best receiver for them, and that was kind of embarrassing for much of last season, so they had to move on. So they made some big moves. They invested massive money in Christian Kirk, the Cardinals' former number 2. They're playing off DeAndre Hopkins, and Zay Jones. He's bounced around with the Bills and Raiders, and they invested in him. So now those guys are your receivers there with Marvin Jones. So they had a lot of juniors there with Chark and Shenault and Marvin Jones, but now Kirk and Zay Jones are the guys around Marvin in this passing game. So those are the guys there that you look at. Yeah, the passing options are much better. The pass protection, pretty good there with Cam Robinson there on the left side. So they've worked on becoming better up front. So decent offensive line. I wouldn't say it's a world beating group. But we also know that Doug Peterson, he's a bit of a quarterback whisperer. I know he needed Frank Reich and John DeFilippo there to help him with Carson Wentz early in that quarterback's career in Philadelphia. But he's going to get the basics down for Trevor Lawrence, get him loose and running when needed. It's a little bit more improvisation, a little bit just pressure off Trevor Lawrence that he's going to have fun playing again, which I think that was a big part. It just wasn't fun playing in that Urban Meyer team, and just with their offense, Darrell Bevel is rather stagnant here. There are no concerns about, again, his durability is there with Lawrence and being able to move around. So let the kid loose and let him free to throw the ball. And I think there's going to be high volume for Trevor Lawrence. I mean, this defense is still not very good. There are a lot of holes. They've tried to upgrade different spots around Josh Allen, invested a lot of money, but I still think defense is going to leave a lot to be desired here. And you look at the Colts, a team that is going to be ahead in a lot of these games. The Titans have owned them a little bit, so the passing option will be there. The Colts are the toughest defense in the division, but the Titans have some question marks. The Texans certainly do as well. So there's going to be some time for garbage time. That's what we're looking for. And I think it's going to be interesting between Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, who had massively disappointing rookie seasons, and Zach Wilson, who can stay healthy for his, is how much you can get from these guys. Because I think the weapons are a little bit better. The schematics and support are better for all these quarterbacks. So they have no room to go but up here. Trevor Lawrence is just too talented to just be buried right now. Number one overall quarterbacks tend to eventually get there and produce there. We don't want him to be Baker Mayfield, however. We want him to be more Matthew Stafford and that type of quarterback established with his big arm and turns into a reliable fantasy football asset. So there are things to like about Trevor Lawrence. The weaponry, the skill set, just the pure talent alone is the number one. Just let him get comfortable, let him throw the ball. Don't rein him in the way that the Jaguars did with Bevel last year. That's the key. Is if you let them make mistakes, the interceptions, they were still there last year when you reined them in. So at worst, the interceptions go up a little bit, but the production goes really high, and you get a Stafford-like situation develop here with Lawrence. And again, they need to use his legs more. Again, getting a few touchdowns and some chunks of yards doing that is pretty key here for any quarterback, especially a young one. And at least with Fields and Wilson and Lawrence, you have that aspect that can really help them. So looking forward to what Trevor Lawrence can do. I think he's an upside guy that you can look at if you're in the streaming quarterback game. He's certainly in the mix for you. If you get out of those first few tiers where you're starting to look at quarterback at QB9, then you can hedge your bets here, get different options. There are definitely places that he can produce for you. Multiple games in a more favorable offense and a better schedule with a little bit more experience here in 2022. I think it makes a lot of sense to take him in the middle tier QB2s. Don't have too high expectations, but be pleasantly surprised to be as good value playing off another quarterback in a platoon or streaming season-long situation. All right, there's a breakdown of Trevor Lawrence here for what he could provide in fantasy football in year two. We'll get into Travis Etienne, his fellow second-year player out of Clemson, in our second key question, looking at the Jaguars. Before we do that, level with me here. We've all needed some extra cash at some point in our life to get us out of a pinch, just to catch up on life. It's difficult sometimes, especially now, the squeeze on the economy and gas prices can be tough. And look, if you're living paycheck to paycheck and just struggling to make ends meet, it can be really stressful, especially when unexpected expenses come up on top of the things you're trying to catch up on. Now, Dave can help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. If you haven't heard of Dave, you should, because Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's what it's called. So extra cash from extra cash. That's more money that you can use to help pay for gas or groceries, or just to have a little bit extra there for something special that you want to do and you need to get ahead on your savings to do so. You can find it for future things that you're thinking about that have been stressing you out with no any hangups at all. And there's no interest and there's no credit check needed to get in on Dave. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app. That's DAVE. the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and you need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand for future you. To get Dave, just download the Dave app, D-A-V-E, from the App Store right now. That's D-A-V-E. Sign up for an extra cash account, and you can get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, make sure you go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking is provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Dave, future you will thank you. All right, it is time to continue the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football. Look at the second key question facing the Jacksonville Jaguars for fantasy football in 2022. We'll do that in a moment. Make sure you're getting in on all the podcasts we have coming around the league. We're going team by team here. That's what we do 5 days a week. Training camp preseason is here. We're with you all season long through the draft, breaking things down for your team, what's going on, what their season is shaping like, what the position battles are. We've got you covered here on the Locked On Network. So find your favorite team, your team every day here on the Locked On Network. All right, it is time to continue the show and ask that key question with the Jaguars backfield. Can Travis Etienne be trusted as an RB2? That's where he's going right now in drafts in the 20s range. So that's 20 to 24 in a 12-team league. That's how we look at an RB2 there, starting at the RB13 on the board. Yeah, there's some Etienne buzz, especially half-point, full-point PPR because of his pass catch and roll. James Robinson also on the mend here. So Etienne ahead of Robinson in the health issue department. So that helps. It's a tough injury for Etienne. He had good volume there at Clemson. But again, has a familiarity with Lawrence, and I think they can be mutually beneficial to each other in their production this season. So Etienne's going to get a first crack here to get key touches. There's a hint that Doug Peterson may be more committee-like, but he loves Etienne and what he can do. He's had these type of players before when you look at Philadelphia. So Robinson, again, it's been a good run, but how effective he can be post-injury, we'll have to see. That pivots everything to Etienne. Their third running back is a former Jaguar returning, Raquel Armstead, and Snoop Connor is the fourth on the depth chart. So not a lot there behind Etienne to think that he could be limited. I don't think they're going to wear him down, but I think they're going to have a unique role for him to get him in the open field and get him some touches that way. Again, this receiving core, there's a lot to be desired here that is reliable. So again, Etienne and the checkdowns are going to be there. I think he's a bit underrated as a power runner if they want to use him in that capacity here. I think there's a little bit of Miles Sanders in him that the Eagles and Peterson were familiar with there. So there's that type of player. So Etienne's in a good position to succeed. Again, this offensive line a little bit better at run blocking and then pass protection as well. Again, checkdowns, that's going to be a primary source. I don't know if he's going to be an 81 catch guy the way that Alvin Kamara, he's been much compared to him, is going to happen here. But again, this is where the Jaguars backfield is going. And I'm not going to overdraft him. There's always hype over rookies. And Etienne is essentially a rookie who didn't play his first year and is now starting it all in year two. We're going to monitor the health not only of Etienne, but of Robinson as well. But he should get a sizable amount of touches. Just don't overdraft him. Don't get too crazy and draft him in the teens. I think keeping him down in the 20s makes a lot of sense because, again, Robinson could heal up and be a factor. And we know Peterson is not a stranger to committees and spreading the ball around and limiting the return there. So I prefer Etienne more that RB2 flex borderline versus the RB1, RB2 borderline. That's how you have to approach it, even with Robinson maybe being on the picture or not being the much of a factor and Armstead being the number 3. They're going to be careful with Etienne, but it's a new coaching staff, so they're not going to think much about last year and the wipeout that it was with the Urban Meyer era. They're going to look at what Etienne can do now on the upside, and they're going to say, look, he's a first-round pick. He's got some talent that we want to showcase on the field. We need to take some pressure off our young quarterback. Who better to do that than a guy that is used to playing with that young quarterback in the backfield and taking pressure off him? So a lot of good stuff here for the Jaguars. But just be wary. Don't get caught in the overhype and fall into that rookie trap with Etienne. Even last year was tough between Etienne and Robinson. I think he wouldn't nearly have the same kind of buzz if Robinson wasn't hurt. So keep that in mind. But be wary and don't go too much all in on an unknown quantity where you know he's not going to step in like a Najee Harris and be that type of player in that first full season. We know that for sure in Jacksonville. All right, we will get into our final question looking at the Jaguars that we want answered for fantasy football ahead of the 2022 season, ahead of our fantasy football drafts. We'll do that. I do have to tell you, make sure you're checking out Locked On NFL here on the network. League-wide look at all the biggest storylines, different guests, and we shake it up there, and we're covering the entire league for you, every aspect, breaking it down. So check it out, Locked On NFL, our flagship show here on the Locked On NFL Network. All right, it is time to close the show and look at what we have here with the Jaguars wide receiver core. Do we trust Christian Kirk to even yield us wide receiver 3 value? Oof, this one's tough. Christian Kirk broke the bank here. It really was fortunate to leave Arizona and get this deal from Jacksonville, but they were desperate for number one. They didn't want to reinvest in DJ Chark coming off the major injury last year. Marvin Jones, just a guy. Zay Jones, just a guy. Marvin Jones was very effective, we know, in his previous stints there with his other teams, but faded quite a bit. He had some moments last year, but really, Christian Kirk is their number one, and Jones in some order is 2 and 3 here. There, Laviska Shenault is dropped to number 4, and Treadwell number 5, and Jamal Agnew bringing it up at number 6 here, a guy that has made some plays for them. But Christian Kirk, I think, will get at least target volume here, but they could spread it around. He's also trying to reestablish a passing chemistry with a new quarterback. Marvin Jones has a little bit of that. So to me, here's my take is this is why I'm worried about Trevor Lawrence over drafting. I think he's going to spread the ball around and get some different source of production using the tight ends. And Etienne, I'm just not too interested in the Jaguars wide receiver. I'm just not going to go there. I want to see it play out a little bit. Christian Kirk has not been a go-to guy before, and he's been limited number 2. We want to see what we can get after the catch, see what his role is. It would make sense that he can produce, being their new number 1, seeing some targets, but Jones and Jones are going to be involved quite a bit. Shenault is no pushover as well. Treadwell had a key spot there, so this could be very much wide receiver like committee, and no one really operates as the true wide receiver 1 here. Kirk can be the big play field stretcher at times, but he can also be a possession receiver. So I think the potential is there for Kirk, but I'm not going to risk too much of a pick on it. I'm not going to do anything more than a wide receiver 3 back end for Kirk. I'm not going to think about him as a wide receiver 2 just because of the money and his role on the team. I need to see a lot for this Jaguars team to be trustworthy. I think, again, Etienne and the tight ends can cut into what these receivers can do quite a bit here in 2022. So, yeah, it's tough. I mean, Christian Kirk in a lot of leagues, I mean, it's just hard to go that way in fantasy with Kirk. I mean, I just don't want to go there and overdraft this player just because of what the money is. And you can't always look at money in terms of what a player's real worth is in fantasy football. If you did that, you'd be really disappointed. So I think there's some intrigue with Christian Kirk, but again, right now, you're looking at him, he's outside the wide receiver 3 realm going in the 40s in drafts. And if that's your top wide receiver, that just makes you be buyer beware overall. So again, he's rallying around the rankings where Drake London is getting some buzz as the Falcons top receiver, replacing Calvin Ridley. Brandon Ayuk is the number 2 near Deebo Samuel. Russell Gage was the Bucs number 3 with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Robert Woods is the Titans number 1. So we'll get into him and his value there. But Christian Kirk, no one is really high on him. But look, if his value gets too far down, you might as well take a flyer. But again, it's really hard to invest in anything of the Jaguars. Passing him, you have Marvin Jones. He's ranked in the 60s right now. So people just don't want part of this. And you look at also Laviska Shenault ranked at 79. Zay Jones is not even getting any real consideration in the 90s here. So Shenault, again, is the guy that you should get for the value, I think. He's just being so underdrafted here. There is some good value. I've liked this receiver coming out of Colorado for a while. I think he deserves a bigger role. I think he'd easily displace one of the Joneses in the offense. So if I'm going to go with the Jaguars receiving core and invest in them in fantasy football, I'm going on the cheap side here this season for sure. I just don't want to invest too much. Again, Lawrence spreading around, getting some value from running back, tight end, and a little bit more depth at wide receiver. I think that could add up to some decent numbers in some situations, but no more than a streamer to me, and that's why I'm going to take him as a late QB2, and that's why I want to take a wait-and-see approach and avoid the Jaguars wide receivers as much as I can in drafts. Unless, again, someone just falls to me and you have Christian Kirk just sitting there and no one wants to tap into it, then it's worth taking that chance. So really, Jaguars in general, not the best team that we're looking at for some fantasy football production yet. And it's unfortunate they basically lost a year last year, and this is basically rolling over into a rookie year with Peterson. So again, if you're going to draft anyone, I think Etienne still makes the most sense as a bottom end RB2. Everyone else, just be wary of here in 2022 with Jacksonville. An intriguing team. See what they get with Doug Peterson, but I think they're going to have to take some more lumps, and they're going to have more appeal to us in fantasy football in 2023. So there you have it. There's a look at the Jaguars, and we will move on to the Titans tomorrow. That'll be our team under the spotlight as we're getting close to getting into all 32 teams. That means we'll finish the AFC South with only one more division left in the AFC West and those 4 teams. So we're going to end on a bang with a very offensive-minded division with a lot of quarterbacks and fantasy football potential in the passing game. So something the Jaguars don't have too much of. So we'll be excited about getting there and finishing with a bang with that division here on this key question series that we've done for all 32 teams on Locked On Fantasy Football. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. Now make your second listen. The Locked On NFL podcast, our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and latest news from around the league. Because an offseason, as we know here in Locked On Fantasy Football, doesn't equal a break in the action. For Locked On Fantasy Football, for a look at the 2022 Jaguars, this has been Vinnie Iyer. We'll close out the AFC South on our next show, looking at the Tennessee Titans.